Hello, hello. Today, I am Young Penitent. You're in my icon corner, and today I have an extra special guest, and I think you all know who he is. But icon corner, and today I have an extra special guest, and I think you all know who he is. But icon corner, and today I have an extra special guest, and I think. Okay, I think we're having a little bit of a issue with the audio. Well, okay, I'm gonna bring him in here. Let's see. I'm gonna see what happens. This is you know who he is, the author of the Morning Offering blog and abbot of All-Merciful Saviour Monastery, Abbot Tryphon, and here he is.
Hello, Daniel.
Father bless.
Blessings of the Lord.
Okay. So today we are talking about the importance of male friendships. But first, before we get to that, I had a comment. Someone left a comment on my previous video, and they said they wanted me to tell you, this is from Peter Gunn, and he wanted me to say that he loves you. And actually,
I'm so relieved it's not a threat.
Yeah, and actually, I think I can speak for all of us. I wanted to say that we love you. We all love you, Abbot Tryphon. And I think I'm pretty safe in saying that. But before we get started with questions and the talk, I wanted to ask after your health. How is your health doing? I know you have an arrhythmia, I think. Is that right, from time to time?
You know, I'm doing okay. I'm still upright. And as long as I'm upright, well.
Okay. All right, good. Well, so people don't know. Probably let's start with the Salish Brotherhood of St. John the Wonderworker. This is a brotherhood you've established. Can you, for people who don't know what it is, can you just tell us what that is?
Okay. Well, for many years I was traveling to Dunlap, California, to St. Nicholas Ranch for the Orthodox Christian Fellowship, and there were lots of people there, lots of young men. And it was a once-a-year gathering. And one of the things that I noticed early on was that these are young men who would get together once a year, but they were like best friends. You know, it was like getting together with an old friend, but they only saw each other once every year. And so I thought about it. And there was a nun that took care of guiding the women, and then I was in charge of dealing with the young men. And it crossed my mind that these are people, they were scattered across, from San Diego all the way into British Columbia and different parts of states of Washington and Oregon and Idaho and so on. And I thought about it and how in my own life, how much my friendships, my male bonding, if you will, had meant to me. And I thought it's too bad that they can't see each other more frequently. So that what I did is I proposed the idea of having a brotherhood, a lay brotherhood. This is something that was very common in Russia in the 19th century. Young men would come together and bond together as a brotherhood. And the brotherhood was something meant to last, into old age. It wasn't just something that, well, we're here now, and then we're beyond that. It's not like graduating from college. So I asked these guys if they were interested, and they all said yes, they were. That moment that this was created, you had it on your flyer about this. You're announcing the podcast. That group there, we were all wearing sunglasses, identical sunglasses that came from St. Catherine's College in San Diego. One of the guys that was part of that was a recruiter for the college. And so I took all these guys that were here on retreat to our Vashon Island farmers market And I didn't tell them ahead of time that I had a surprise in store for them. And so when we were just leaving the parking lot, I said, you know, I'm gonna have you guys chant like you do during the service, and I'm gonna have one of you as the cantor and the rest of you backing him up with the responses. And then I said, it's too bad we don't all have identical sunglasses. And one of the guys said, I have them. I have a box full of them. So he dug them out of his trunk and everybody put them on, and we walked over to the farmer's market. And the signal was that when I put on my sunglasses, everybody would put on their sunglasses, and they would all come together and they would form a big half circle, and I would join them, and we would start this singing. And it was a mind blower for people. There were people taking their phones and recording it. We even took it further. We went to a restaurant, and we all sat at a big long table. There were probably about maybe 14 of us. And we all got a beer. And the signal was when everybody was halfway down on the beer, they would all stand up and go to the far end of the restaurant and do the same thing. And the owner of the restaurant came out with her camera and recorded it. And a few days later, when I was meeting with a friend for breakfast in this same place, one of the waitresses came up to me and she said, you know, I have never seen anything like it. She says, all these handsome young men singing religious music. Well, that's quite a momentous moment on this island, because this is an island of supreme wokeness, if I may say, and very few young people go to church or even are religious. So for these people to see all these handsome young men singing religious hymns together at this farmer's market was a mind blower. I even took them over to our main grocery store and did it in the lobby of the grocery store. Well, anyway, back to St. Nicholas Ranch. I proposed that we call this brotherhood the Salish Brotherhood, which is because Vashon Island is surrounded by the Salish Sea, which is the largest inland sea, one of the largest in the world, in fact, and it goes all the way up into British Columbia. And that's what the Puget Sound is about. It's about part of the Salish Sea. So I had all of these guys there, surrounded by the Salish Sea. So I said, let's call it the Brotherhood of the Salish Sea. And then, so that it wouldn't be misinterpreted as some kind of secular thing, I said, let's have as our patron St. John the Wonderworker of Shanghai and San Francisco. So it became the Salish Brotherhood of St. John the Wonderworker. Interestingly enough, when I was telling a priest friend of mine about the whole organization and how it began, and he looked at me and he said, you do realize that the last time that there was a young brotherhood established in this country was by St. John himself. So here we are, we're the Salish Brotherhood. We had a minister from the Los Angeles area that visited the monastery, and he and I were sitting in my study and having a nice chat. He says, you know, when I get back, I'm sending you a gift. He said, it's something that I bought and I've only worn it once, so I'm sending it to you. So he sent me in the mail the staff of Gandalf and the pipe and the hat and the sword of Gandalf and a robe, which of course I didn't need. And so whenever the guys come here and we induct them into the Salish Brotherhood, we do it formally with the sword. I knight you as a knight of the Salish Sea. And so we've been doing that for some time. And the reason why I wanted to do this is because I really believe that friendship is important and male bonding is important. And we now live in an age where the usual places where men bonded together as friends would be places like the Elks Club, or some kind of a gathering of like around a bar or a service club. But once that was being frowned upon, and like Rotary is a good example. Rotary was initially for men only. And because so many of the men there were businessmen, and they were interacting with each other and bonding with each other and helping each other with their businesses, it became a stickler for a lot of women who said, well, that's not fair that we're not part of this. Introduced members who could be women. And I'm sure some of these organizations are now going to allow transgender people to join. Who knows? Lord have mercy. So, that was the whole formation of this. It was to do that. And one of the things that I want to share at this moment is that I still have friendships with guys that I went to college with back in 1840. Really not. I graduated from college in 1970, but that still dates me immensely. But there's something about longevity in friendship. And I remember when I was a therapist in Portland, Oregon, and there was a restaurant in a hotel in downtown Portland that I used to go to at least 2 or 3 times a week to have breakfast before I went to either the college where I was teaching or the clinic. And there was one day of the month when there were a group of older women sitting at a big round table in this restaurant having breakfast together. And there were 8 or 9 of them. And then when I was about to leave Portland and move to the Bay Area, I asked the waitress to give me the bill for them. I wanted to pay their breakfast. And then I walked over and I told them that, by the way, I have paid your breakfast, but I've got to know, who are you? What brings you all together? Well, it turned out that they had all gone to a prep school in Portland together, a Catholic prep school. And that when they graduated, and they were probably a few years older than I was at the time, they decided that they wanted to continue on getting together. So they bonded with one another and made a promise that they would, as long as they could, would meet for breakfast once a month. And there they were. And then one of the women said, the wonderful thing about having old friends is you don't have to introduce yourself and explain who you are, because everybody knows who you are. They know your history because you were in prep school together. And so I saw that as what we could have as this Salish Brotherhood. And so they have their own Facebook page. They're in contact with one another. And we still have twice yearly retreats here at the monastery with the Salish members of the Salish Brotherhood. And then we have, whenever somebody is being inducted as a knight of the Salish Brotherhood, we have a sponsor. So one of the guys will be his sponsor, and then I will use the sword carefully, might add, to knight them as members of the Salish Brotherhood.
So that brings actually up a couple questions. So while you're talking about the knighting, is there some sort of vetting process, or what are the requirements, or how would you decide if someone?
The normal thing would be, if you are between the age of 18 and 36, I think it is,
Okay.
You're welcome to join.
Oh, okay.
And if you going to 37 or 38, but you've been part of it, or into your 40s even, you can still be a member. But we find that most of the young men that come here for the retreats, in the summertime, there's a camp out, but they put up tents out in our forest, and in the winter, people bring pads and sleeping bags, and they sleep in the trapezus, the trapeza of the monastery. But it's wonderful, and everybody getting together, and the beautiful bonding. And I usually stay out of it because I want this to be something that goes beyond my death. You know, when I take the bucket, I want to know that these guys are going to stay together, just like I do everything I can to make sure that this monastic brotherhood outlasts the old abbot.
Is there a, so I know there's usually a winter retreat. Is there a retreat coming up that you have planned yet, or?
I think there's going to be one in February. I haven't heard yet from the guys that are organizing it, but there's some talk about it being in February.
Okay, so, and if somebody was interested in finding out more about this, could they contact your monastery if they wanted to join? Or
they could contact me, and I would connect them up with the powers that be. So my email address is Abbot Tryphon at vashonmonks.com. Abbot Tryphon at vashonmonks.com. And oh, by the way, the word abbot has only one T, and Tryphon has one T. Tryphon.
Okay. You mentioned
changes the spelling of abbot, just so you know.
Who?
Spell check.
Oh, spell check does. Oh, okay. You mentioned a group of women who were joining for fellowship. Is this importance of friendship amongst people, amongst friends? Is it the same between men and women, or are there differences?
Well, because I don't identify as a woman, even though it's popular to do that this day and age, I can't really speak for women, except that women that I have known over the years who have strong bonds with their friends, I would have to say that it must be at least similar. And I think it's kind of the same bond that you find in women's monasteries, that they're not just a bunch of women who get together who are religious because they become part of a family. Mother Markella at Life Giving Spring Monastery, who's, by the way, my sister, she adopted me, and we have a very close relationship, and all of her nuns are like my daughters in my heart. But I think what's important about male bonding is that it helps us through all kinds of trials and tribulations in our lives. One of the things I've observed about these guys is that they are like, if one guy's girlfriend broke up with him, and he's got his brothers that can kind of give him support and encouragement and say, don't despair, or thank God that she broke up with you. You weren't right for each other, that kind of thing. But I also have to say that when I think back, even to, I even have an old friend who was my debate partner in high school, and who's a retired professor at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, and he comes every summer for about a month to visit his adult children in Portland, Oregon, and I always like to go down there and spend a few days with my friend Jim and reconnect. And it's really important, and I've noticed that. In fact, Jim and I, when we get together, the first time we did this was after 50 years separation. And I show up and pick him up, and we drove to Portland's Grotto, that center, that Catholic center for the Holy Virgin. We drove to Multnomah Falls and walked up the trail, and we found ourselves talking about the same things that we did in high school. It was amazing. It was like no time had passed at all. And there's something even in this brotherhood that I founded, this All-Merciful Saviour Monastery brotherhood. Every single monk here, there are 6 of us now, every one of us is very, very different, but we love one another. And I feel loved and supported by them and they know, and I know that they know that I love them, and I do everything to support them. But this isn't just about monastics doing this. It's about all of us. All of us men do this. And when I have the Salish Brotherhood guys here, even though I let them have a lot of the time alone sitting around the campfire, last year when there was a burn ban, they sat around the campfire with flashlights in the pit and sang Christmas. They sang Orthodox hymns. So that's really beautiful. But what's really wonderful about doing this sort of thing is that these are guys that are like their brothers. And it's interesting. One of my best friends in college, who was a photographer, he died at the age of 56 of cystic fibrosis. And he had converted to Orthodoxy about 3 years before he died. And his friend, or his priest, was my dear friend and confessor, Father Nicholas Letton, who in monasticism became Father Andrew. And so Father Nicholas served as Russell's priest. And when Russell died, and Father Nicholas and I did the funeral together, and I met his son for the first time. And his son has gone through 14,000 photographs that Russell took. Many of them photographs of me on the first trip that I went to San Francisco in a bread truck that was converted into kind of a psychedelic vehicle. I was a hippie at the time. And we drove up the coast. It was the first time I saw the Pacific Northwest. We went through the Avenue of the Giants in the Redwoods. And it was when we were in North Beach of San Francisco, I went into a clothing store that was right in the heart of North Beach, bohemian neighborhood. And the store sold English gentlemen's clothing, sport coats and slacks and such. And I went in there and spent $70 that I didn't have. And I came out, and we're about to cross the street to go into Cafe Trieste, which is my favorite coffee house on the West Coast, and certainly the oldest. See if you can find that picture, brother. In here, somewhere in here, I think. And so Russell took this photograph of me. We're standing there about to go across the street and into the Cafe Trieste for the first time. And so a couple from the Midwest saw me, and they ran across the street. They wanted my autograph. They thought I was John Lennon. And the next night, we went into Aliota's restaurant on down in Fisherman's Wharf. And the waiter came over and he said, "Would you sign this menu?" He says, "Now I know you're not John Lennon, but there's some people over there that think you're John Lennon, and it would mean a lot to them if you signed it." And my friend said, "Don't sign it John Lennon like you did last night." So I signed it my given name, David Parsons. And when we were leaving, the waiter came up and said, "You won't believe this, but those people from Minnesota, I think, they think they're the only people in the world that know John Lennon's real name." So one of the photos that my friend took of me was in Golden Gate Park, and I liked it so much, and I hadn't seen it since the 60s. And so I had it, I sent it to a friend of mine in San Francisco who photoshopped the new me, or I should say the old me, into the young me. And so let's see if you can see this.
I can see it's a little So what he's showing is David is Abbot Tryphon on the left is old David, and on the right is the younger David. Those are
Yes,
both.
yes. So anyway,
So I think I've shared this with you before. We have an informal men's group at our parish or on a local level here. It's great to be part of the Salish Brotherhood, but that's you meet twice a year. There's a lot of time in between. So I mean, what would you do? What do you suggest for people, for men? While if they're not participating in that particular group, in the meantime, what will you suggest? Maybe activities for people to do, or
well, we have every Saturday after our service, Saturday evening, we have what we call men's night in the library, and so any men that are visiting or regulars that are here, we all go into the library and then have a beer or a glass of wine or something like that. One, and but it's a time of bonding, because these are people that we only normally see once a week, and so we look forward to it. We have one happening again tomorrow evening, and one of the guys, he and his wife have been on vacation, and so we haven't seen him for a few weeks. So everybody's looking forward to seeing Thomas at this gathering. Lots of times, if we have visitors that we can, if they're available, we'll allow them to come in and join us. They have to be very special individuals for that. And I think you've been one of them, if I remember right. But I think, especially in this age of unbelief, so many people, they claim to be atheists, although I don't really think they are. I think they're just simply agnostics who would like to believe in God but don't. And one of the things about getting together with Orthodox Christian male friends, the bonding that takes place, is you're supporting one another in your faith. Because all of us go through periods of time when we maybe are struggling with some issue in our lives, or we've lost our job, or we're depressed about stuff, and sometimes that has caused people to sort of wane. Maybe they don't go to church as they used to, or maybe they're not sure God exists, or they're thinking, well, why am I going to the Orthodox Church? The services are so long and we have to stand. But when you have men who are your friends and they're Orthodox, then there's this encouragement that takes place. And I remember some time ago, we had 43 people that showed up for the Sunday liturgy here at the monastery. And I would say that probably 2/3 of them were young men. And watching them all standing in our little temple, worshiping together during the Divine Liturgy, for me was very inspiring. When I came out to give the homily and I got a really good look at all of them, it really touched my heart deeply. And seeing the young men when they come and they're sitting in the trapeza together for the meals, and I see the same thing happening. I don't need to be sitting there to be inspired by that. I'm sitting at the abbot's table with my monks, and I see it from a distance. But it gladdens my heart like I cannot even express. It gladdens my heart. And this is something that I want for everybody. The other thing that I've noticed this last summer, I was a guest speaker along with Metropolitan Jonah at the Orthodox Montanicon in Butte, Montana. Of the 150 registered for this, 95% were young men. And not all of them were Orthodox. Those who were not Orthodox were seekers. Just this weekend alone, I've had a number of young men come through here who are seekers. They feel like this world has given them nothing. They don't know what to do with their lives. They have a spiritual void and they don't know how to fill it. And so a lot of them start going online and they're searching. So for instance, a couple of days ago, I had a man here young man who discovered my YouTube videos, abbottryphon.com. Abbott And it turned out he's been following me and watching my videos, which are about the spiritual life and about Orthodoxy. So all of a sudden he shows up here and he wants to know more. And one of our monks is actually teaching a course in Orthodoxy after the trapeza meal on Sundays after liturgy. And we've had as many as 14 or 15 people show up for that, including people who are Orthodox, who want to know more about the faith. But again, when I see young men bringing their friends, one thing that kind of blew my mind recently is one of the young guys that actually comes all the way from Seattle every Sunday for the liturgy is a tattoo artist, well-known Seattle tattoo artist. And recently he brought another tattoo artist with him to show him his Orthodox experience. And then I mean, this is the kind of thing that networking among young men can produce faith.
Now, you mentioned specifically friendships among Orthodox Christians. I had actually a question come up from one of my viewers, and he wanted to know what about if you are converting and you have these old friends, should you still be maintaining friendships with them, especially if they're doing things that Orthodox Christians shouldn't be involved in, like drinking heavily or using drugs, that kind of thing?
Well, that's a really good question. And one of the things that I think is important, I'm going to try to talk quieter because my voice is going, getting a little grovelly. So I might have to have you give me a little bit of water. Anyway, I step over here for just a minute. This is our latest community guy. This is Brother Basil. He is our novice. Tell him where you're from.
I'm from St. Louis, Missouri.
And he's a really great guy. And he's a techie. So he's helping me put together stuff that I could never do before.
Like this interview, right?
Nerf him a little bit.
He was helping at the beginning here.
Yeah. So what was the question again now?
About friends that are not Orthodox that might be.
Okay. I have, it's part of my makeup. I have never ended a friendship. I sort of learned this from my golf pro dad, that, you never walk away from a friendship. So I've had people walk away from me big time, but I've never intentionally walked away from anyone. But when it comes to people that would say be into, smoking pot and drinking heavily on the weekends, I drew the line a long time ago. I'm not going to hang out with people like that. It doesn't mean I'm not willing to get together and have coffee with them. Okay. But I'm not. Thank you. But I'm not going to do anything to be encouraging that kind of behavior, because I'm an Orthodox Christian and I'm a monk and a priest. So it's very important, that I'm connecting with people in a real way, that gives me an opportunity to be the light of Christ to people who don't know Jesus Christ and who do not know about Orthodoxy. And, it's interesting. Many years ago, I used to speak regularly at college campuses in the area, Pacific Lutheran University, Seattle Pacific University, occasionally the University of Washington, and Evergreen State College. And the one that I've noticed whenever I've done this is that when I would share about Orthodoxy and the history of Orthodoxy and the theology of Orthodoxy, it was sort of like I would see a light bulb go on out there. And then I would have young people come up to me, both young men and young women, who wanted to know more. And they would actually come out to the monastery. And I heard this over and over, that they felt like they had discovered Christianity for the very first time. So I'm talking about people who had long ago walked away from their churches. And then they hear me talking about Orthodoxy. And they think, oh my gosh, is this Christianity? Is this ancient Christianity? And the fact is, it is ancient Christianity. My own parents converted. I'm 77, and my own parents converted when they were in their mid-70s to Orthodoxy from Lutheranism. And I remember how my mother was very upset when I left my former life, wearing suits and sport coats and ties and bow ties and all of that, and being a professional. And all of a sudden I became a monk. And so, here's my mother, when she sees me after I've been a novice for 2 years and I've just been tonsured, and I go home to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho to visit my parents for the first time. And I walked in and my mother took one look at me. And the first thing she thought of was, oh my gosh, you've turned into a hippie again. Because of my beard and hair and dressing, as she put it, dressing weird and having things around your neck. And smelling of incense. Those were biggies for her. So I knew there was no way that I was going to be able to get my parents interested in Orthodoxy. And I didn't want to be, browbeating them or shoving Orthodox theology or history down their throats. I didn't want to give them books on Orthodoxy for Christmas or icons for their walls that they probably wouldn't want. So what I did is I wrote their names down and I put the names under an icon of the Holy Virgin. And I asked her intercession for them. And then I asked God to help me be the very best son I could be to my parents. And lo and behold, my parents became Orthodox. And I think a lot of times, especially in an age where people don't talk about Christianity, or Christianity is seen as backward and stupid, there's a lot of young men, a lot of people, period, who, if they are a person of faith, they don't talk about it. They don't tell anybody at work. They don't let people know they're religious or that they go to the Orthodox Church, because they don't want people to think they're weird. And yet something happens when one does share it. And it can be shared in a subtle way. Mm. Like a good example would be you're going out on your lunch hour from the office and you're sitting in a little diner down the street. And the waitress brings everybody their plate of food. And without a great deal of fanfare, you make the sign of the cross and bless your food. And then eat it. You do it in silence, but you do that. And then all of a sudden people, oh my gosh, what does that mean? It's a backward form of the Roman Catholic making the sign of the cross. And then they start asking, oh, you're religious. Oh, you believe in God? Oh, wow, you're a Christian. You're Orthodox? Well, what is Orthodoxy? And before long, you've got some of your friends and co-workers wanting to check it out. And just think about it. If you hadn't blessed that food with the sign of the cross and made it a simple blessing over yourself with the sign of the cross, They wouldn't know. So it's not about being preachy. It's not about evangelicals who want to sit across from their best friend and say, do you know Jesus? You don't want to do that because that just turns them off. But when you do it in a subtle way, and the other thing about it is, when you have friends visiting you, maybe they're visiting you in your bedroom, or they're visiting you in your home, or your kitchen, or your living room, and they see icons on the wall. It reminds me of a time when I was speaking during my time speaking at Seattle Pacific University, and I took a couple of my monks over there once a month, and we got permission to do Vesper service, and we were told we could have it anywhere we wanted. So we chose to have it in a very large room in the student union that had floor to ceiling windows. And since the Vesper service was done in the evening, everybody that walked by that building saw us having a Vesper service in there. I mean, and all these students, in a Free Methodist university attending this Orthodox Vesper service. One time, and it's probably one of the most memorable times for me on that campus, it was after Theophany, and I was going to do the blessing of Orthodox students' rooms. So we went up into we processed across. I thought, what the heck? We'll bless the whole campus. So I had holy water, and we're singing Orthodox hymns, and we go from the student union, and we're crossing through the campus, and I'm splashing holy water everywhere. I was even invited by one of the faculty members to go into one of their buildings and bless all of their office rooms. And I said, you do know that this church, this Seattle Pacific University may someday become St. Vladimir's Orthodox University. And so, but we went up the elevator and down this hallway to one of the members of our Orthodox group, and we went into his room. And as I was ready to bless it with holy water, I said, "Which is your desk?" And he pointed to this far one. And I said, "Don't you have any icons?" "Oh, yes." And he pointed to this little tiny icon card of the Virgin that was propped up on his desk. And I said, "Tell me the truth. Did you pull that out of the drawer knowing I was coming?" And he sheepishly answered, "Yes." And I said, "Why don't you have your large icons from your bedroom at home here?" "Well, I don't want to foist my religion on my roommate." And I pointed to his roommate's desk and I said, "Why not? He's foisting his religion on you. He's got this large poster of Madonna on the wall." And so the following year, we're walking into that very room, and to my amazement, the wall between the two desks was a wall of icons. And there was a lampada hanging there with a candle burning. And I said, "Did you lose your roommate when you did this?" And he says, "No, half these photos are my roommate. Half the icons belong to my roommate. And we went in together and we bought the lampada." And I said, "So do you have a different roommate or the same roommate?" "Oh," he says, "Oh, the same roommate." And I looked over the other desk, and the poster of Madonna was gone, thank God. I hope they used it to wipe their feet, but it was gone. No disrespect, but we need to pray for that poor woman. But again, he said that he brought one larger icon of the Virgin and put it on his wall over his desk. And his roommate said, "Oh, what's that all about?" And then his roommate became more and more interested. And when he found out he went to an Orthodox service every Sunday for liturgy, he said, "Oh, would it be all right if I went with you?" And he said, "Sure." The next thing is roommate was Orthodox. So think about it. You know, it's part of this brotherhood of friends encouraging one another in the faith. And we all have moments when we're so full of doubt, or we have struggles in our lives and things aren't going our way and we're wondering if God is anywhere. But if we've got Orthodox male friends and we bonded together and we get together with each other, we support each other. And I saw that, you know, in Butte, Montana. And I see it all the time with all the young men. We get huge numbers of young men come through this monastery, either overnight or for a Sunday liturgy or a day visit. And many of them are not Orthodox yet. And I always do that standard thing of saying, come home to Orthodoxy.
So my next question is, what about, well, you know, our society today is quite atomized. People go to work and then they come home and they're alone in their apartments. Now, sometimes people will go online and find communities and chat rooms, or they'll have chat rooms with friends. Is there a place? Could this be seen at all as like at least at the very least a stopgap measure, finding community online? Or,
you know, any way that we can connect and bond is good. And lots of times, some of our friends are long distance. One of my dearest friends, Father Mark, is at a Serbian monastery just outside of Chicago area. And Father Mark and I were in a theater company together in Portland, Oregon, back in our young days. And I always thought he was real strange because we all knew he had a really long beard and long hair, and he was the stage manager of the theater. And I remember one time when I heard him tell somebody that he went to St. Nicholas Orthodox Church in Portland. And so I asked him about it. Well, it was around getting near Pascha. And so I showed up at St. Nicholas, and they were overflowing with people. It was a small church at the time. And so I was standing below the steps of the front door when the priest came out, crying out, "Christ is risen." And that was the only time I'd ever attended an Orthodox. That was the first time I'd attended even a tiny little portion of an Orthodox service. And but I still didn't do it. I didn't join the Orthodox Church. But years later, there was a monk that was wanting to come and spend some time at our monastery. And on his way journeying from Florida, and he got to as far as Eugene, Oregon, and he was there a few days at an Orthodox church. And the priest there called and said, you know, there's a monk here that would like to visit your monastery. Is that okay? And I said, well, our metropolitan is coming, so it's going to be a little bit of a delay, but yes, we'd love to have him. So the next thing, he was in Portland, and he was staying with my friends, Father Nicholas and Matushka Barbara Letton. And so Father, and I heard that he was staying there. So I called Father Nicholas and I said, tell me the truth. Is this guy a nice fellow, or is he weird? Because he's wanting to spend some time with us, and I want to know, can you tell me about him? Oh, you'd really like him. He's a really nice, personable guy. He is has a sweet personality. He's got a good sense of humor, and he's very devout. I think you'd like him. And he says, oh, by the way, he used to be the choir director at St. Nicholas in Portland. Really? So I didn't tell my friend that I knew who he was talking about. So Father Mark showed up at the monastery. He was here for a few days. And after the Sunday liturgy, where we celebrated together, I said, would you like to go on a little journey? I'll show you the island. So we drove around the island, and when we were on the far west highway of the island, I came to a stop and I looked over at him and I said, "So, Richard, how have you been all these years?" And his mouth went open. "How do you know who I am? How did you know that was me?" And I told him who I had been. And we've been fast friends ever since. But one of the things that we do is, this is tea I'm drinking, by the way. So we we are sitting. So we're kind of reminiscing about the days that we were in theater together. Well, now what we do is at least once every 2 weeks, we FaceTime each other. So you can actually see a face. And that has made all the difference in the world, because it's not just a telephone call where, "Hi, how are you doing?" and you don't see the person, and then you're bored in a few moments and you want to get off the phone and click. You are actually looking at the person. Unfortunately, both Father Mark and I have aged tragically. So we're looking at two old men looking back at each other. But that's something that anybody can do. Young men can do it. So even if you live in another state or another city or across town, just calling up a friend using FaceTime and looking at their face, and just maybe holding up a painting you might have just done, or reading a poem to your friend, or just talking about your life and what your job is like, and tell them about your new girlfriend, or how your wife is doing. Those are things that are important for building up a relationship with others. And it's really important when it comes to building up that bond of brotherhood.
I think you guys just heard some excellent advice. I think Abbot Tryphon has a special. I think his special gift is building friendships. That is something that he does well. So we have less. We're coming up on the hour mark pretty soon here. So not a lot of time left with today's stream. If people maybe have a chat, like a question in the chat, now would be the time to think about that. This is actually a question that is a little off topic, but it's concerning me. Is this what we have going on with what amounts to persecution in Ukraine at the moment? Is that would you call it persecution? And do you think that is something that could spill into America?
I think it's already spilling into America.
Okay.
I'll tell you something about the Ukraine. This island of ours is just, you can't drive a mile without seeing a Ukrainian flag flying from somebody's tree or front porch. And, every time I see the Ukrainian flag, what comes to mind is the Nazi flag, because what most Americans don't know is that the Ukrainian, the Jewish man who's the president of the Ukraine, most of his big supporters are Nazis. They actually wear Nazi uniforms. And for 20 years, they've been essentially the Polish side of the Ukraine, which had been invaded by the Poles, have been persecuting and killing the Russian side. So this is not one nation. This is a nation split in two. And if you look at the history of Europe, you'll see that the borders have been changing through history. And, if the United States had listened to Putin and guaranteed that Ukraine would not be welcomed into the European Union, this would never have happened, but it did. And it would be sort of like if we all of a sudden saw Mexico and Canada. I think Canada is actually very close to having this happen. becoming an outpost of China. And, it's like what happened with the Cuban Missile Crisis when President Kennedy stepped forward and told the Soviets, get out of Cuba, because they were putting missiles there, nuclear missiles that could take out Washington, D.C. in moments. And he forced them out. They backed out. And so what are we doing? What about the border? I have in my whole, even when I was in college, I taught English as a second language to Hispanics. So, I love Spanish people and Mexicans, and I love Black people. So it's not about wanting to keep America white, but when you're opening up the borders like we see happening, the background of that is there's motives behind it. We're going to get them all in here by the millions, and then we're going to give them full citizenship and let them vote. So we'll stay in power as the Democratic Party. And I will have to say this, I know what I'm talking about because back in the 70s, I was a radical leftist. I was at one time a member of the Central Committee of the Socialist Workers' Party. Once I was in Portland, and around 5:30 in the evening, and this was the height of all the burning and nasty demonstrations and shootings that were taking place in downtown Portland, and most of it in front of the Federal Building. And I drove down there, and I drove around the Federal Building, and I saw a man on the riverside going in through a steel gate, and I pulled over and I said, "Excuse me, but are you a federal agent?" And he just kind of looked at me like, "What do you want to know?" So then I went around the second time, and by then he was at the front behind the gate, behind the steel fence, facing all these radicals that were over there. And I pulled up and I pulled out my chaplain's badge. It's a big sheriff's badge. And I said, "Oh, I just want you to know that I'm on your side." And then I said, to give you a little of encouragement and hope, I used to be on their side because back in the 70s, I was the leader with the bullhorn, bringing 1,000 people up to this site. And I said, I'm in repentance for those days. That's why I'm serving as a police chaplain. I'm in repentance. I'm on your side. So he gives me this great big beaming response. And all of a sudden I'm thinking, all those people across the street have just seen this federal agent smiling at me, and I'm holding up something, and they're thinking, he's an undercover agent looking like a hippie or something. So I got out of there and I came back to Vashon Island early. But my point is that I look at young people today, and I'm not surprised that a lot of them have been radicalized. But I also know my own history of having been radicalized. I can remember in my senior year in college, I wore a brown beret with a red star on it. I mean, how more leftist can you get? So I know what they're about. I know what Antifa is about. I know what Black Lives Matter is about. I remember when I first heard about Black Lives Matter and I Googled it, and I found that the 3 women that founded Black Lives Matter are self-proclaimed leftists and lesbians. And I wasn't surprised to see that at all. And I certainly wasn't surprised to see that one of them spent millions of dollars on a mansion with money from Soros. I wasn't surprised at all. And recently the White House entertained a party with drag queens at the White House. I mean, that was on the news. And Biden and his administration were proud of the fact that, look how open and inclusive we are. We even invited drag queens to come into the White House. Christianity, I mean, you can be anti-gay to the point of throwing a gay man off of a roof in a Muslim country and not be judged by American media. But you cannot speak out against gay marriages and transgenderism and the networking with our children by these beasts and be seen as anything other than a narrow-minded, bigoted, right-wing extremist Christian. That's what we're at. You know, so that people that are throwing themselves into this new religion, which is leftist, is sickening to me. And I see this country changing radically in the last 4 years into a country that I don't even recognize anymore. You know what my answer to all that is? I go out into the community looking like this with the cross of Christ around my neck, and I smile. If I go into a restaurant and I see some people sitting in another booth next to where I'm going to be seated, I lean forward and say, "You're going to have to watch your language now." And they laugh. And they see that I have a sense of humor. You know, because the last thing I want people to think is that if you're going to be a Christian, you're going to be some sort of a beast and a nasty person who hates everybody. I don't hate anybody. And I'm not going to judge anybody. I'm not going to judge the lesbian couple that I run into. I'm not going to judge. I mean, I can tell you that Vashon Island has one transgender person that, I mean, even the drag queen couldn't compare. You know, I mean, it was so weird. But I'm nice to everybody. And I'm not going to judge anybody because St. Paul said of himself, I'm the worst of sinners. And so I know that of myself. I'm the worst of sinners. And we're told we cannot judge anyone. We can only judge ourselves. So I judge me. But at the same time, I'm not going to muzzle myself with the truth in the Gospels. And the scripture isn't just about good times and sweet by and by and all that garbage. The scriptures gives us the moral teachings that are pleasing to God and connect us on the royal path. And the Orthodox Church does the same thing. So that's what we need to do. Do I hear an amen?
Amen. So we've passed an hour mark, which was what we had agreed before the stream started.
If there's other people that are still there and still have questions, I'm ready to go on a little bit.
Okay, well, there's a couple. I do have a couple questions. Well, another just showed up. One person says in the chat, what is the outlook for women in the West? Doesn't look too good with social media and so forth. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. You know, one of the tragedies of our age right now is that young people aren't getting married and they're not having babies. And I certainly am not one who believes that women should be relegated only to the kitchen and to childcare. But let's face it, regardless of what some people are saying out there, men cannot get pregnant. I'm sorry, but that's the case. And, you know, we need to recognize that biologically women are different than men. And women are able to give birth to the next generation. And women have a special gift of nurturing, but fathers need to do that too. I'm always a proponent, you know, and I remind people that in the Orthodox marriage ceremony, unlike the Western churches, we don't have exchange of vows. It's not like the woman pledges obedience to her husband. The sacramental part of the marriage ceremony in the Orthodox Church is the crowning. It's not the crowning of a little prince and princess. It's the crown of martyrdom. And it's that moment when the man is pledging obedience to his wife and she's pledging obedience to her husband. Both are killing the ego. So a man has an obligation in my book to come home and help wash dishes and help clean house. And given the economy, a lot of households require both of them to work. And some of the best parenting I've ever seen are young men and how they parent their children. But the best parenting is when a husband and wife are doing that together. And children whose dad, especially boys, when their dad is an open Christian, and his Orthodox faith is not just on Sundays, but throughout the week. And the family has what we refer to as the domestic church, where everybody comes together and they're standing before their icons in their living room, praying the morning prayers and the evening prayers together. And one of the kids is reading the epistle reading for the day, according to the church calendar. And one of the other kids, or maybe one of the parents, is reading the gospel reading for the day. And then they get together and they maybe watch a movie together. And everybody has their darn cell phone off. When you get home, take your cell phone and turn it off and put it in a common basket. That goes for parents, it goes for children. Because that's the time when families bond. When I was growing up in the 50s, I can remember that happening. We didn't even have a TV for a long time. And I remember how when my dad would come home and my brother and I were all excited and we had an evening together, and then my brother and I would go out and play cowboys and Indians in the neighborhood with the other kids. And we'd have dinner together as a family. And it was a Christian household. And now everybody goes their own direction. You know, the boy goes to his bedroom, the girl goes to her bedroom. Mom and dad, are on their laptops or texting messages or looking at their schedule for tomorrow at work. And the whole family has just dissipated. They're just like spread out. And then all these houses, they're so much bigger than they were when I was a kid, some of them. So everybody has their own little place to hide. And we need to bring that to an end. And we need to really nurture one another. And women, I'm not suggesting that women, bow their heads to their husbands. I am recommending that men and women together love one another, nurture one another. I remember once there was a couple that came for counseling. This is many years ago. And the woman had just told her husband that she was thinking about filing for divorce. And he said, and so in my office, my study here, he said, well, why? I love you. And she said, I don't know you love me. You never say you love me. Well, I love you. And I asked him, I said, do you ever come home and walk into the kitchen and put your arms around your wife when she's preparing dinner or washing dishes and say, honey, I love you? Well, she knows I love her. Have you ever said that you love her this week? And it was like, oh, I didn't, I guess. And I looked at her and I said, when is the last time you remember your husband saying, honey, I love you? And she said, I can't remember the last time he said that. And, sometimes that's all we need to do is we need to tell our wife or our husband or even our friends how much we love them and how much we care for them. because people don't know that. You know, it's not like they're not on autopilot.
Okay, we have a question from Joel, who is asking about Orthodox baptizing converts who have already been baptized from a previous confession.
Oops. Well, that's a very touchy subject.
Yeah, that's what they say here in the
It's
chat.
a very touchy subject. I know priests that hate the Greek. They hate Mount Athos, because if you go to Mount Athos as an Orthodox man and they find out that you were not baptized, they're going to pressure you to be baptized while you're there. That's a given. I know that because it happened to me. So I was baptized Lutheran, but I was also baptized Orthodox. And in my mind, that's the best thing to do. Some of the jurisdictions have rules that if you were not a Roman Catholic or a Lutheran or Episcopalian or a Presbyterian, you need to be baptized Orthodox. And that those four they'll accept. But there's a big problem with that one. Some of these Episcopal churches today don't even baptize in the name of the Trinity anymore. I heard of one of them, it's I baptize you in the name of the Mother, Father, God, and the Spirit of Truth, and the Son, Daughter, or something like that. It was ridiculous. I couldn't believe it. It's not the Trinity. So would somebody that was baptized like that not want to be baptized as an Orthodox Christian? And what priest or bishop in his right mind would think that you don't have to be baptized after a baptism like that? But the biggest thing is that, yes, we can, as Orthodox Christians, we can look at others and say, oh, well, you know, like my brother, my own brother, my younger brother is an evangelical, and he's a dear friend of mine. I love him dearly. We're close friends. I don't push Orthodoxy on him. And I don't tell him that he's living in delusion, thinking that his church is Christian, is Christ-centered, because I know my brother's heart is Christ-centered. But the best way I can witness for Orthodoxy to my brother, to my family, to my relatives, to my neighbors, is to let them see the light of Christ in me. So when it comes to this baptism thing, I'm going to have to say that it's best to consult with your priest or your bishop. And if you find that the answer that you're seeking is not the answer you want to hear, then maybe you shop around a bit and find a parish that better fits that standard. Because I personally think that anyone who converts to Orthodoxy should be baptized. But that's just my opinion, and I don't want anybody to think that I'm putting a theological truism out there that better be believed, because I also know people who have been chrismated into the faith, including priests and bishops, whom I dearly love and respect. And if it's a bishop, I'm gonna be obedient.
Okay. One more question we have. This is from Peter Gunn, and he was saying that he had a brother that all of a sudden stopped living recently, and also a father, and he asks you to pray for Peter and John. And he says, what about praying for the dead? What about praying for the dead?
Yeah, that's important. I'll give you an example of that. There was a man many years ago who converted from the Catholic Church, he and his wife, older fellow. And one of their daughters converted. And they used to come out to the monastery every Sunday for liturgy. And then one night, he was awakened in the dead of night in extreme pain, and he was taken to the hospital, and it turned out that he had liver cancer. And he was dying. And so eventually they put a hospital bed in the living room of their home. And he had nurses that came there every day to help him. And I made an effort to get over there every other day to see him and to pray for him and to anoint him. And then as it was getting closer to the end, I went every day. And the last time that I saw him, his daughter invited me into their living room, and she said to me in a soft voice, a saddened soft voice, "My dad has gone into a coma, and he's not responsive, and we think he's getting near the end." And so I went over and I held his hand and I anointed his forehead with myrrh from the Iveron icon of Hawaii. And then she, as I was leaving, she says, "Oh, and by the way, the last thing he said to me was, tell Father Tryphon that his uncle needs his help." So as I came back to the island, I kept thinking, my uncle needs my help. And initially I discounted it as, oh, well, this has something to do with the drugs that he's on. You know, he's hallucinating or something. And then the more I thought about it, I thought, wait a minute. My Uncle Gordon died about a week and a half ago. And Gordon was not one of my favorite relatives by far. He was a selfish man who, when my younger cousins were still kids, decided that they were no longer going to go to their Presbyterian church in Spokane because he had a row with their minister. So nobody's going to go to church anymore. And so he prevented his wife and his kids from ever going to church again. And then he slipped into dementia. And so for the last 10 or so years, he was going downhill to the point that he didn't even know who he was. So there was no chance of him repenting. So of course it was that uncle who was letting someone near death, who was an Orthodox Christian, pass on the message to his nephew, me. Pray for me. I need your help. And I've done that ever since.
Okay. I don't know. This person has already asked one question. I don't know if you want to answer one more from.
Sure.
Let's see. Is traditional Protestantism collapsing responsible for where America is now?
I have a bishop friend of mine many years ago, a Canadian bishop, told me that he believed that the prominence of atheism in the Western world was based on Calvinism. And he went on further to say that when you have a, quote, Christian faith that teaches that God is an angry God and a vengeful God, and that if you don't do his bidding, you're going to go to hell. A lot of people don't want to believe that anymore. They don't. Oh, well, what is that about? One woman recently I saw interviewed who was covered with tattoos and rings everywhere. Her eyebrows, her nose, her lips, and she had more tattoos on her face than you could imagine. And she said, "I believe in God. I am God, and I worship myself." And that's what we're living in right now. Is people? It's not that people are atheists; they're worshiping a demon, and that demon is thinking that they are a god. That demon is inspiring people to say, "Oh, I don't need something out there," or as one person told me, "I don't need a big daddy in the sky. I am my own God." That's foolishness, and it's tragic. And the mainline denominations, Lutherans, Episcopalians, Methodists, Presbyterians, just to name a few, have whittled down in numbers dramatically. And the church that's growing is the Orthodox Church. And the only church statistically that tends to have, and there's always exceptions, but it tends to have 50% women and 50% men. I was speaking at the Greek Orthodox Cathedral in Baltimore, Maryland many years ago, and there were 400 people there. And I mentioned that. And I could tell by the way everybody was looking around, oh, that can't be true. So I had a young man stand up. I said, I want you to count all the men here. And I had a young woman stand up, and you count all the women. I kid you not, 200 and 200. And a month or so later, I was in Dunlap, California for the Orthodox Christian Fellowship. And I was telling the young people that there were 60 young people there. And I was telling them about that. And I saw the same thing, people looking around, oh, that can't be true. So I had one of the young men stand up and count the guys, and I had a young woman stand up and count the women. 50% men, 50% women. And this wasn't planned. It's just what happened. So Orthodoxy gives to we men what the denominations can't give. You know, part of it is there's two aspects of Orthodoxy. One of the aspects is that it's a physical religion. You know, we worship with all of the senses, the smell, the sight, the sound, the touch, all of that. Most of those denominations can't say that, you know. I mean, the most they're going to do with touch is they're holding a latte in a huge building that looks like a theater. But they don't have incense. They don't have the beautiful chant. And even the music that they have, you know, is not much different than 60s rock and roll. And as one minister or one deacon that I knew who had been part of a mega church told me, that he said there were only about 2.5% of the people actually supported the church financially. And he said, what I knew as a member of the board that directed this church was that we had this huge turnover, but everybody could ignore it because the church was always packed. So people would come for a month, and then they get bored with the you know, the cheap rock and roll. You know, and people that thought they were good singers and good musicians that were on the stage, entertaining, and then would drift away and other people would come. We don't do that in Orthodoxy. But what we do is Orthodoxy has two natures, as I started to say. One of them is we are physical. We incorporate all of the senses into our worship. But then we have another key thing. It's that intuitive nature of the heart, the nous, which is the center of our being. When we are conceived in the womb, at that moment, God bestows upon that new creation, the nous, the eye of the soul, which allows him or her to commune with God and to become a true child of the Most High. So the whole point of our Orthodox journey is to take the mind into the heart. So Orthodoxy is not about a philosophy or even a theology of the mind. It's about taking the mind into the heart where we can truly know God. Women have a better intuitive nature than men. Men are more physical. So when we think of ourselves as men in church, we're standing there almost like soldiers, worshiping before the throne of God while standing. We bring in all the senses. We make the sign of the cross repeatedly during the service. We kiss icons. We embrace one another. We kiss the hand of the priest. We kiss, all of this is what we men do. And that is fulfilling for men. And it's part of why men come to church and why they remain in the church. And women, because they have that natural intuitive nature, oftentimes discover the depth of Orthodox Christianity before the men. But the important thing is that both men and women are working toward the same goal. A man must take the mind into the heart and open up the nous, the intuitive nature. And a woman must become more physical in how she worships.
Okay. Okay. Can you answer one more for me? Because this,
Of course I can.
This question is interesting to me because this is Young Penitent channel. And so can you give us the meaning of repentance?
Well, you know, some Protestant once that attended a service of ours, and afterwards he says, "Why is it that you Orthodox say all those Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercies?" And I said, "You mean the 40 Lord have mercies?" "Yes." "Why would you always say that? Of course God is merciful." Well, first of all, we want to examine the word mercy. When we are saying, "Lord have mercy," or when we're saying, "Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner," we are recognizing that the God that we are praying to, mercy is not just about, "Don't hit me, Lord, don't hit me." Mercy is about the breath that we take in. It's about the food on our table. It's about the sunlight. It's about the love of our family. Mercy incorporates every aspect of our being. And so when we pray to God to have mercy on us, it means we're asking God to flow down his mercy and make and activate essentially everything I've just discussed. So that's a critical part of it. But we also want to know, we also want to be aware of the fact that all of us fall short of the glory of God. And as I said earlier, St. Paul himself said that he was the worst of sinners. And part of being the worst of sinners is frequent confession. I don't mean like once a year. I don't mean like, walking in. You know, I've seen people come in and they've got a list. And so they go through the list and they recite the list to their priest. I've had people done that, and some of the things don't have anything to do with them at all, but they're saying it. That's not what confession is about. The best advice I can give about confession is to have a little notepad, and during the week, don't put your name on it, because if you lose it, you might be in trouble. But during the week, when maybe you were in a moment of anger and you used the name of the Lord in vain, write that down. Or you were driving and you cut off somebody because you were in a hurry and you were angry. Write that down. You drank too much wine. Write it down. You judged someone. Write it down. You leaned over the table at your office and said, "Oh, do you know what they did?" Write it down. Write down the sin of gossip, so that when you show up for confession on a weekly basis, you've got that, and you open it up, and there it is. You don't forget. And that will keep you from just during the little litany of, "Oh, well, blah, 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 blah." And every priest has heard all that blah, 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 blah. But if you're sticking to that, you're not going to truly enter into real repentance, because you're not aware of how much garbage you need to repent about.
That is excellent. Excellent advice, Abbot Tryphon. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been a wonderful time for us, very informative and educational.
And my joy.
And you would be welcome back, of course, anytime if you so wished. So,
And anytime you want me back, you let me know, because I have so much on my plate, I might forget.
okay. Father, bless.
Blessings of the Lord upon all of you. Big time.
Thank you. Okay. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.